Hi, I'm Vivian Brown, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this edition of A Bare Moment with Speaker of the Texas House, Joe Straus, who represents House District 121. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to sit down and talk with you.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you to the Bexar County Republican Party and for all the good work that you're doing for all of us.
Great. I'd like to start this interview with your thoughts on the Planned Parenthood video. A sixth video in a series from the anti-abortion group Center for Medical Progress was released this week. And on July 28th, Dr. Ben Carson, when he was speaking to a rally to defund Planned Parenthood, called them hypocrites. He went on to say that these are the same people that say it's a meaningless clump of cells, but yet they're trying to harvest the kidneys, lungs, and livers. Conversely, the day after these videos released, former gubernatorial candidate Wendy Davis sent Planned Parenthood a check for $100 in their support. Even some pro-choice advocates are appalled by this video. What are your thoughts, and are the liberals just out of touch?
Well, I think there's no doubt that these videos that have been released this summer have been found to be objectionable, to be abhorrent. The idea that fetal harvesting is occurring is something that no one really thought was imaginable. I'm pleased to say that those of us in the Texas House are strongly supporting Governor Abbott in his call for a thorough investigation. And I think additionally you'll see the Texas House committees during the interim that we have between now and January of 2017 getting into this issue themselves and taking a look at what can be done in the next session. But I also want to remind your viewers that the Texas legislature in the last couple of sessions has done what Washington talks about, that we have defunded every program possible in Planned Parenthood. But at the same time, we're not losing focus of the importance of women's health care. And we have tried very hard to replace the funding that once was administered through Planned Parenthood to other programs to provide much needed health care for women.
All right, let's switch topics. Kids are going back to school this week, and young adults are moving on to college, so I think education is on pretty much every parent's mind right now. When you became Speaker of the House in 2009, Texas ranked 43rd out of 50 states with a graduation rate of 61%. Now, 6 years later, the National Association of Educational Statistics ranks Texas third in the nation with an 88% graduation rate and number one among blacks and Hispanics. The Education Commissioner, Michael Williams, announced that the graduation rate is the highest that it's ever been, and it marks the 7th consecutive year for an overall increase. What do you attribute this to? What do you attribute this to, and what needs to be done to make Texas number one in education?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and I'm glad you're pointing out the success stories, because all too often people are looking at the negative side of education, and it is a very complicated, very difficult, very challenging issue in this state, and nothing's more important than a good, strong public education system and having well-educated young people coming into our workforce. You mentioned the statistics that are encouraging for our minority kids and the much higher graduation levels than were achieved before. I hope it's because our accountability system is working to some degree. Our accountability system is meant to find areas of weakness early in a child's educational attainment and to help guide educators to address those weaknesses before it's too late, before these kids are lost in the system. So I hope that part of it is working well. I don't ever put too much faith in statistics, because sometimes you can get them to tell you whatever you want them to say. But on the upside, I think that any improvement, whether we're number one or not, is certainly encouraging that we're on the way up, and we need to keep our focus there to do even better in the future. One thing that we have done in the legislature in recent years, and a very major education reform bill was passed in the session before this, in the bill, House Bill 5, and that was really meant to focus on education for our young people, to give more relevance to the educational experience at very young ages. so that young people, before they're lost in middle school and early high school and don't think they have a very promising future, that we're trying to encourage pathways of educational attainment in areas that they're interested in, to give them some cause for optimism, that they'll have a bright future if they work hard, if they study, and that they attain work skills, whether or not they're interested in going to a 4-year college or a 2-year community college. The main thing is to make sure that our young people are headed to a good job where skills they can learn along the way will be a big benefit to them and a big benefit to our economy and our whole state of Texas.
22% of the nation's tech jobs are right here in Texas, and more companies are moving here every year. San Antonio is working to build a more affluent, educated base for these future jobs. Yet, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, only 25% of San Antonio residents that are 25 and older actually have a bachelor degree or higher, and the poverty rate sits at 20%. What can you contribute these numbers to? And is it simply a question of higher education just being too costly, or is it these students just aren't prepared to enter and complete college?
Well, I think it's the latter. Probably an element of both, but it's probably the latter. I think that as I said, we're now much more engaged in public education in Texas on catching kids earlier and giving them a path to attaining job skills in areas that they think are relevant to them. One thing that we did in this most recent session, it wasn't a major bill, but it is, I think, an important building block, and that is to focus on counseling early in a young person's education, to help upgrade the training that counselors have so that they can then impart their advice to young people to help build them up, to build the expectations, to make them more ambitious, really, to impose upon them or impress upon them the importance of pursuing a higher education, whether it be a 2-year or 4-year college. And it's going to take time, but I think that that by giving kids a relevant education and helping them along the way with good counseling is going to make a difference in the future.
Well, let's talk about job growth. Texas is undoubtedly a pro-business state. For example, more than 60 companies have relocated here from California. Texas topped California for the first time ever with technology exports. Telecommunications devices, semiconductors, and computers are all made here. In 2014, this equated to more than $45 billion in technology exports. What can be done to help Bexar County capitalize on the growth and create more jobs in the tech sector?
Well, you point out some good statistics there and some interesting facts I wasn't aware of. But I do know that the Texas economy is much more diversified than it used to be, and that's a very strong selling point. You talked about all the companies that have moved to Texas, the jobs that have been created here, and I have to give some credit to former Governor Perry for being such an excellent salesman. Governor Abbott is following in those paths and doing a good job too, selling Texas to employers out of state and actually internationally. So I hope that the executive leadership and salesmanship that we've had from our governors will continue, and the legislature wants to be good partners in that. But the continued diversification, you talked about high-tech and high-skilled jobs. We can't rely on the oil patch alone. And the good news there is, even with tumbling oil prices, our economy hasn't been affected yet as negatively as it would have been 20, 30, 40 years ago with similar ups and downs in the oil patch. So to continue to diversify our economy, to concentrate on high-tech jobs, and jobs that require skills, and making sure that our young people have those skills required to keep this economic engine growing. Texas is, I think, about the 12th largest economy in the world if we were our own country. And it's no accident. Texas is very pro-business. We will remain that way. And it all revolves around education. Transportation is a big part of that, making sure that our goods and our people can move efficiently. I would say that our regulatory structure in this state is pro-business. It will continue to be, to encourage businesses to invest and to create jobs here. And also the importance of not allowing frivolous lawsuits to impede the growth in business. So Texas has been a continuing economic powerhouse, and I think the legislature and policies that we've enacted there and are vigilant in protecting, I think will lead to an even more promising future for the state.
Well, we have an enormous resource in San Antonio with more than 106,000 veterans residing here. What can be done to help these veterans as they separate from their military duties and to encourage businesses to hire these highly trained men and women?
Well, one of the great attributes and one of the great advantages that San Antonio has and Bexar County has is the large number of veterans who return here and who want to live here the rest of their lives. And you're seeing more and more emphasis on making sure that our returning veterans have opportunities. And it's not just an outreach program to do something nice for our veterans who are our heroes. It's something self-serving for business too, because the skills and the education and the training, the discipline, the work skills that are acquired in the military service can provide outstanding employees for businesses. You don't have to look very far here in San Antonio to see one of our huge businesses, USAA, for example, that was built really on the serviceman and woman. And not only do they have servicemen and women as customers, a great number of the employees of USAA are veterans themselves. And I just had breakfast this morning with the president of the Alamo Community Colleges, and they're starting a new program with assistance from the legislature to help focus in on these returning veterans, make sure that they have the job skills that they need, to make sure that the job skills they've acquired in the service are tailored to the jobs that actually are represented in the current economy. We also passed a program in this last session of the legislature that should help these returning heroes, giving them college credits for the training and the education that they received in the military. So we're finding ways to help, and the good news is that San Antonio has always attracted more than our fair share of veterans, and I think that's going to continue to strengthen our economy and our social fabric here in this community.
Great. Let's talk about tax relief. I know you worked really hard on it this
Yes.
session. In June, Governor Abbott signed into law tax cuts for homeowners and businesses worth more than $3.8 billion, and he repealed a $250 million worth of professional fees. What is the immediate economic impact of these cuts?
Well, we were pleased when Governor Abbott laid out his priorities and proposals when he was inaugurated as our governor in January. And the legislature was all too happy to comply with his wishes. And we made some very, I think, impactful tax cuts and fee eliminations for our businesses and for individuals and professionals and homeowners, as you said. And the legislature filled in the details for the broad policy that the governor outlined for us. We did make a 25% reduction in the business margins tax, which will help businesses invest more. Instead of paying taxes to the government, they'll have more money to invest in their businesses, have more money to expand their businesses and employment. We also did a $10,000 increase in the homestead exemption, which will help shield a little bit rising property taxes. Now remember, property taxes are local taxes, not state taxes. So there are limits to what the state can do there, and we need to keep up the pressure on local officials to make sure that our property taxes don't continue to skyrocket. But property values have risen in Texas. That in and of itself is a good thing, but we have to lower tax rates, and I hope our local officials will get that message. But we at the legislature have at least increased the homestead exemption by $10,000. You mentioned the fee elimination. Back when the margins tax was instituted in 2006, a lot of businesses and mostly the professions were not subject to the margin to the franchise tax. Well, the margin tax came in and captured a lot more businesses, including professions. And then in this session of the legislature, we felt that it was appropriate to eliminate the fees on professionals who are also paying the margins tax. And in many cases, it was $250 a year or something like that. that landscapers and architects and people in the professions had to pay. Well, they no longer have to pay that every year. And that's about a $250 million tax cut that's ongoing every single year. So those three items together add up to about a $4 billion very meaningful tax cut. But all the while, we passed, I think, a responsible budget that addressed public education and higher education and transportation in a very meaningful way. So I'm proud of the work that we did in this last session.
Well, let's talk about transportation. During the last session, the House prioritized transportation and voted that the state highway fund should go entirely to its intended purpose of transportation projects. In November, the voters will be able to approve a diversion of a percentage of the state sales tax to go to these projects. Let me remind our viewers, though, in 2013, Texas overwhelmingly supported diverting money from the rainy day fund for transportation projects. Oil and gas prices, as you mentioned, are down to about $40 a barrel, and this is about $100 off their high from 5 years ago. Since the rainy day fund is funded mostly from oil and gas revenues, was this a mistake?
No, I don't think it was a mistake at all. You can't control oil prices, but the rainy day fund, which by the way will be at a very healthy all-time high of $11 billion, is, and there's a cap there too, so we were getting, at the time, very close to capping out on what could be kept in the rainy day fund. So in order to avoid raising taxes, we decided to pass a constitutional amendment that was approved by the voters, Proposition 1 a couple of years ago, that does take some of the money that would have gone into the rainy day fund, about half of it, and instead goes to transportation, much needed transportation projects. So I don't think it was a mistake at all. I think it's been a boost for transportation projects, much needed congestion relief. But we did more than that too, and I'm glad you mentioned the ending of diversions. That was a very high priority of mine and a very high priority of the Texas House for a long time, and very difficult to get past. For about 80 years, our gasoline tax was assumed to be going into the highway fund. Well, most of it was, but not all of it. And it was very difficult to explain to people why not. So we bit the bullet, and we ended diversions completely in this last session. So every dollar of the gasoline tax is now going to the highway fund, as it should be. And that's going to result in about a $600 million per year increase in highway construction, which is a very important thing. And then the third piece that you mentioned is Proposition 7 that's coming to the ballot here in November, where the legislature passed, subject to ratification of the voters, use of about $2.5 billion of the existing sales tax, above a certain amount, but we'll get there. $2.5 billion per year will now go in addition to the Proposition 1 money and the ending of diversions. So assuming that passes, which I'm confident it will, we're talking about $4 billion per year additional for highway funding. And this is very critical for people in Bexar County because I think with these steps taken together, it will now enable us to finally stop talking about, to stop debating about, to stop studying the project on 281 to expand it to a real freeway. And we can do it without tolling it, which I think is going to be a very popular and a very positive shot in the arm for people in San Antonio. And I've called on the Texas Department of Transportation Commission and also the local MPO to approve that project now. Let's start digging the dirt and getting that expansion without tolls done right away. And so I'm excited about that, and I think you'll see some movement on that soon. And it's all because the legislature has focused on putting more resources without raising taxes or relying on debt as we have in recent years, but putting more money into expanding highways, and one right here in the middle of Bexar County, 281, which has been on the designing and drawing boards for well over 10 years, I think now can be a reality and without tolls.
Well, I know the governor made his commercial that was kind of funny, that he could roll along higher than you, faster than you can drive. It's definitely an issue. I know you've, instead of increasing taxes, you want the pay-as-you-go, and that's going to keep the toll roads out of Bexar County.
Well, it will on 281, and I hope on other roads. I know I-10 has needs, and 1604 and others. But my view is, let's strike while the iron's hot. while we have everything lined up on 281, and it's a very big project, let's go on that, and let's work on the next pieces when we can get to them. But this whole state is a very competitive place. If you've driven in Austin, you've driven in Houston, you've driven in Dallas, San Antonio is not the only congested big city in Texas. So I think it's very important that we take advantage of this point in time and get going on 281.
Great. Well, Speaker Straus, thank you so much for joining me today for this Bear Moment. You have been an enormous supporter of the Bear News since it started 20 months ago, and I sincerely thank you for that. We enjoy your articles every month. We get comments every month on them.
Good.
I hope you will come back again, and please join me next month for another edition of the Bear News. Speaker Straus, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vivian. Thanks for all you do, and thanks to the Bexar County Republican Party. It's very, very nice to have you in our corner.
Well, thank you so much and have a great day.
You too. Thanks.